Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 176 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it going. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start off by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can find out more by going to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/Observer's Notebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at $22 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, this episode of the Observer's Notebook. And we're talking the mission OSIRIS-REx. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest, the ALPO coordinator of the Meteorite Section, Dolores Hill. Welcome to the podcast, Dolores.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, before we get into the topic today, why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background about the Meteorite Section?
Well, the Meteorite Section has been around for a long time. So far, we concentrate on trying to identify suspected meteorites, and are still working on how to help people who have meteorite collections participate in research activities. We don't concentrate too much on trying to locate meteorites because there are lots of issues that go along with that. So we concentrate on encouraging people to look at their own collections and notice things that are different and unusual that researchers might be interested in. It's also a joy to be able to look at meteorites under a microscope, and a number of our people enjoy doing that as well. We also do have one person who enjoys searching for potential impact craters.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
Yes.
Wow. And how long have you been the coordinator of the program?
Oh, goodness. I should have looked that up. Many years.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, and today we're going to talk about the OSIRIS-REx mission, and you are an integral part of that right now, aren't you?
Well, I'm a very small part of it, but I get to be around many of the activities, and so I get to do a lot of different things.
Okay, what's your role and responsibility?
Well, I'm on the sample analysis team.
Okay.
Before that, I was part of the communication and public engagement team.
Okay.
And with Carl Hergenrother, that you all know, led the Target Asteroids project that continues today as Target NEOs with the Astronomical League. In addition, I created a lot of outreach activities for the mission. that we now use at the Lunar and Planetary Lab at the University of Arizona. And so I do a lot of different things. Rick, my husband, will joke that I'm in charge of laboratory safety, so I'm kind of bossy.
That sounds like Rick.
But for a good purpose.
Yeah.
And so for the OSIRIS-REx mission, I support the science team in many different ways, preparing the labs for the sample, helping prepare the sample, helping to analyze the sample, curate it, a lot of different things.
Okay. Well, why don't we take a step back and you tell us about the OSIRIS-REx mission, how it started, and
wow. Well, it's interesting that originally the OSIRIS-REx mission came about because Lockheed Martin had invented a special collector that could pick up rocks. And they looked for researchers who might want to propose some sort of a mission that would use this device known as the TAG-SAM, the Touch and Go Sample Acquisition Mechanism. TAG-SAM is much easier to say. And apparently they approached a few people who said, well, it sounds interesting, but no thanks. And they ended up here at the University of Arizona and spoke with the director of our laboratory at the time, Mike Drake. And he was a famous meteorite researcher. And he said, oh my gosh, I have always wanted to go to an asteroid. Of course, I would be interested. So the rest is history.
Wow.
Mike Drake and Dante Loretta, also a meteorite researcher at the time, proposed a mission to collect material from an asteroid. At first, they wanted to go to several asteroids and eventually adjusted the mission to scale it back to go concentrate on one important one. And so the mission started off as OSIRIS and eventually was known as OSIRIS-REx. And
it's an interesting acronym because I'm looking at what it, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I worked for NASA for 35 years and I'm really good with acronyms, but this one really kills me.
Yes. So I have to confess, it took me a little while to learn it. I actually printed it out and put it on my computer so that I would see it all day, every day. But it's perfect. It describes all of the objectives of the mission. And Dante Loretta, the head of the mission, came up with it. He said he was writing down different objectives of the mission, scrambling the words, and it just fell into place. And so it was wonderful. So it stands for OSIRIS-REx, Origins of the Solar System, Spectral Interpretation, Resource Identification, Security, and Regolith Explorer.
Very good.
And the most important part for the meteorite people on the mission, of course, is the Regolith Explorer. So regolith is just our fancy word for dirt on an airless body, like the moon or an asteroid. But it's very, very important dirt that has lots of secrets.
It's kind of like wine. The important thing about wine is the dirt it's grown in. Okay? I get that. Now, it launched back in 2016, right?
Yes, September 8th, 2016. And it spent about 2 years getting to the asteroid because, as ALPOers probably know, you can't just travel straight to it. So we had to orbit the sun, come back towards Earth for an Earth gravity assist, and eventually end up at asteroid Bennu. And once we arrived, we didn't actually orbit it at first. We sort of flew with it around the sun. And when we did finally orbit, We set a world's record for the smallest body orbited and the closest orbit.
Oh, my.
And then very soon after that, we broke our own record. So that was kind of a fun little bit of trivia there. And we spent about 2 years studying the surface, trying to determine the compositions, the structure, the terrain, the thermal properties, many, many different aspects of the asteroid, with the prime goal of determining the best place to collect our sample. And then once we did, we took about 2 years to return, and we came back September 24th of this year.
Yeah.
That was the only date and time of the entire mission that was fixed.
Wow.
Everything else had a lot of leeway, but the return date was absolutely fixed. And so we were quite happy that
that's crazy.
Yeah. And for those that may have seen the return, it is amazing to me that it almost looks like someone just carefully set the capsule on the desert floor. It just was so perfect.
It was sitting upright and everything when it came down.
Yes.
It was just
Didn't even roll around.
I was expecting it to bounce and roll around to all sorts of, but no, it was pretty wild. That was very exciting.
Yeah.
It's wow. Right on target too.
Yes.
Great. So you're involved with investigation of the materials it brought back. So what can you tell us about some of the early findings?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to talk about too much of it.
Okay.
But what I can say is that the science team is very, very happy. We did collect more than the 60 grams that was considered our baseline for success. So far, the curation team at Johnson Space Center has collected 70.3 grams.
Oh, my.
And you may have seen some pictures of the tag SAM in the glove box, and there's a mixture of dust and particles, intermediates, we call them, and actual centimeter-sized pebbles.
Wow.
And so we are just so excited. We can do so much with all of those different materials.
Great. When do you get your
But
hands
we
on
won't be using all of those materials. That's the other important thing I should point out, is that the science team will work on 25% of the sample. Okay. The rest will be put away for future generations.
Okay. So when do you get your hands on them?
Well, we actually have some of the quick look sample in our laboratory.
Oh.
And so
we bring the camera down there and show us? No.
Unfortunately, I can't. Sorry.
No, I'm teasing. That's wild. So what excites you? I know you can't talk a lot about what you're finding, but what excites you most about this part of the investigation?
Oh, just everything's new. And I wish I could tell you what we're seeing, but it's just very exciting. We're seeing things that we've never seen in meteorites before. So
fantastic.
That's about all I'm really able to say at this point.
Yeah, we waited a while to do this podcast. I was hoping you'd have enough that we could. This is a tease. I just have to have you on later when we could really dig into the findings. I mean, that's definite. Yeah. So when do you think that will be?
Well, the science team is busy preparing for the receipt of their samples.
Okay.
And as soon as they get them in their hands, they will begin their analyses. In our lab, we have the quick look sample, and that was the tiny amount of material that was swept from the top of the tag SAM collector. And we've already been doing analyses on that. So people will be presenting their results at the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference in March.
Oh, okay.
And so abstracts will be submitted. I think the deadline is end of December.
Okay.
You can be sure that as soon as we possibly can share information, we'll be doing that. But it all has to follow a special protocol.
Yeah, I understand. Every question we answer, we have 10 more questions that come from
Yes,
the results. And just that's the environment working with NASA. It's just everything,
right.
Every time we discover something, now why is this way? Why is it that way? So
yes.
That's great.
So the one thing that we are able to share is that we've confirmed that, yes, the materials are carbon rich and are hydrated. So that isn't a huge surprise, because we did see that in the spectra from the remote sensing on the surface of Bennu. But the collected sample confirms that as well.
Now, would you say Bennu is a typical asteroid?
Typical?
Yeah.
Not exactly. So asteroid Bennu is a carbonaceous asteroid, and so they're abundant, but there are also stony asteroids that are not carbonaceous. We selected asteroid Bennu because it has carbonaceous materials that represent the very earliest parts of our solar system. And we are highlighting the organics analyses because we fully expect there to be organic materials that would not normally survive passage through our atmosphere if they did come in as a meteorite.
Right. They'd burn off.
And for many years, I've been telling people that whoever analyzes the organic materials will discover brand new compounds we've never seen before. So that's really exciting. And we have students working on the mission who've never analyzed a rock before. And their very first rock will be pieces of asteroid Bennu.
So where does this rank in your career?
Oh, it's one of the biggest highlights of all.
Because this is your passion. These objects is something you've worked on your entire life. I mean, it's now to be able to not necessarily hold one in your hand, maybe your rubber glove, but
yes,
it'll be pretty emotional, I imagine too. I mean, it's just like,
well, and to be able to have the context of where the material came from, and to understand something else about the body that it came from. It'll be very exciting, and to have a sample that is pristine. Normally, we see things that are rusty and oxidized, and that makes it difficult to figure out.
Yeah, because you're seeing objects that have come through the Earth's atmosphere.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I remember talking to Carl early on, because I had a podcast with him early on this subject too. But as we were closely orbiting Bennu, I think he said he realized that there were particles coming off the surface. And that was just, he told me that like 2 weeks after he saw that. And that that made the collection probably a lot easier too, because you saw a lot of free particles and material around the asteroid.
Well, there was a lot of loose material on the surface, and that's exactly what we needed for the TAGSAM collector. But Carl's discovery of those particles was just incredible. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because I started as an amateur astronomer, and Carl has always said that he's an old-time astronomer. He was born in the wrong century, and he loves to look at things through the eyepiece.
Right.
And that is exactly how he discovered those particles. He was looking at navigation images and just playing around with the gain. And he wanted to figure out what the constellations were in the background, and if he could identify the star clusters. And, nobody really needed to do that. We knew exactly where the spacecraft was to something like the nearest 5 meters. But he, for fun, wanted to do that. So he bumped up the gain and was identifying certain things. And then he noticed this bright star cluster, and he couldn't identify it. He couldn't find it anywhere. And he knew that it was so bright that it ought to be known. Couldn't find it. Fooled around, looked at the image, enlarged it, and realized those were dashes, not dots.
Mm.
And he literally took a ruler and put it on his computer screen and looked at where those dashes would have come from. So the dashes meant that those particles, whatever it was moving while they took the picture. And all of those dashes pointed back to the same spot on Bennu.
Wow.
And I remember the day he showed me that. We were at a science team meeting, and he elbowed me and said, "Hey, Dolores, look at this." And, today when I tell the story, it still makes my skin tingle because it was just so exciting. Thankfully, they weren't big enough to harm the spacecraft or anything like that, but it was a very exciting discovery. And to this day, we don't know for sure which mechanism is the one that's most responsible for creating those particles.
It's a very cool story.
And incidentally, for the meteor observers in the group, the team actually did check to see if there was any chance that there was a Bennu meteor shower possible from these particles. But in the end, it would have been so low a particle count or a meteor shower count that you couldn't tell.
Yeah, and for a sample return mission, this asteroid was the perfect candidate with that loose material all around us. That's why you got more than you ever expected.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there are people who thought that it's going to come down, bounce off the surface, and nothing's going to populate the sample. So this was perfect. Wow. So what else can you tell us?
Well, I can just tell you that it's all very exciting, and there's a lot of different materials. I've been cautioning the public who might not appreciate it quite so much that the material might be black and more black. But while there is a lot of black material, there's a lot of other things in there that will keep us busy.
Cool.
So it'll be very exciting.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, so
absolutely.
So we'll have to get you on again after the results can be released. But this is a good teaser for that as well.
Oh, it's a teaser, all right.
I can see by your smiling face that you are really enjoying this.
Oh, absolutely. Every day is exciting, and I get to watch over the shoulders of the curation team while they're working in the glove box. And I have to say, I have worked with and prepared a lot of meteorites over my career, and I am just so impressed with the way they work.
Okay.
They are truly the best in the world.
Fantastic.
Just amazing. So my hat's off to them.
And now that's at the Lunar Planetary Lab there in Arizona?
No, this is at Johnson Space Center.
Okay, so you've been over to Johnson working with them there?
No, we have meetings computer, and we literally look over their shoulders.
Oh, wow.
And they're working in a special clean room built especially for the Bennu sample inside a glove box.
Okay.
And we get to watch everything they do, and they work so carefully that every particle is considered precious and containerized.
Okay. Now, anytime you're doing something like this, the technology you're using to do the investigation is a lot of it's new and probably invented for this type of thing. Can you talk about any of that kind of stuff?
Well, the TAGSAM is the biggest new technology of all, and the entire spacecraft in the mission was built around that tag SAM
Okay.
to support that activity. So that was partly a demonstration of the technique, and certainly it can be used as a collector on the moon or other asteroids, perhaps even planets. So that was wonderful for Lockheed Martin to demonstrate its usefulness.
Yeah.
Many of the other techniques, the cameras and the laser altimeters and things on the mission were standard instruments where we made improvements, but they were pretty much standard. And so that was a good mixture of new and legacy instrumentation.
Okay. That's fantastic. Well, you got anything else for me?
Just stay tuned.
Oh, we will.
The best is yet to come.
Okay. This is very exciting, Dolores. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
And we will touch back in first quarter of next year, hopefully.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. You take care.
You too.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. Again, want to thank Dolores Hill for coming on the podcast today. And I'm sure looking forward to talking to her when all the initial results can be released. I'm looking forward to that. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. If you like it, please subscribe. You can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Echo, Spotify, and this podcast is also available on the ALPO YouTube channel. You can help support this podcast by donating to it via Patreon by giving up to $35 a month, where you receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their continued generous support of the Observer's Notebook. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is cometman@cometman.net or on Twitter at ObserversNBpod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.